Worldwide movement, peace, love, respect. Big King Sadiq hollering at you one more again. All right, man. Another beautiful day, right? You can see how bright it is over my shoulder. That's literally sunlight just glazing the street, right? I'm in walking past a little bit of shade right now, but yeah, man, a beautiful day. Thank you all once again. I love you all. Thank you for helping to continue to build the worldwide movement. Peace, love, respect. All right, man, please continue to like, share, subscribe, click your notification button, and let's keep growing this thing, right? I wanted to talk about an important subject that I've covered before, right? But I'm going to attempt to maybe take it to another level, right? You know, just as we can look at things in varying degrees and levels and whatnot. You can look at things from, like, you know, the microcosm to the macrocosm. Differences, excuse me, in perspective and also in magnitude, right? All right, so the subject is energy vampires, by the way, and in terms of what I've covered previously, I think I covered in halfway decent, in pretty decent detail, you know, how that can be manifested in terms of physical or mental, energetic vampirism, right? Or on a spiritual level, right? How we can be talking about just a certain energy, right? That can be vampiric in nature, meaning that it feeds off of or sucks your energy, or it can actually be an entity or an individual, right? Or group of individuals, or organization, right? As we'll start looking at some of the higher levels of this thing today. So one of the characteristics, in fact, was, you know, we've all experienced those individuals who tend to walk into the room and right away, you know, whatever merriment or jovial nature was in the room is just sort of sucked up right away, right? And a wave of seriousness and almost discomfort comes over the entire room with this individual's presence, right? And that's sort of one way of looking at the effect of an energy vampire, right, in a given atmosphere or area or environment, right? But we spoke about the core element of it, in that we're talking about an energy entity or individual, group of individuals, etc., that suffer from a deficiency, right? It's an energetic deficiency, okay? And this deficiency stems from that lack of connection, right, with the source energy or the org energy, however you want to look at it, that surrounds us, right? When you don't have that connection to creator, to your source, to your higher power, however you want to deem it. And this is not, I'm not speaking on a religious level, but I'm not precluding religion, right? I'm just generally talking about having a spiritual connection, particularly also to the planet. That's very important. We tend to somehow separate ourselves from this planet that has absolutely everything to do with our existence, right? Everything that we are, everything that makes up what we are, comes from this planet, right? Every molecule, you know, every atom of your body is composed of what this planet has offered for your incarnation, right? Quite literally, on a scientific level, you are indeed made up of what has come from this planet. Even energetically, right? Okay, I don't want to get too far off into another subject because this could start to touch into the reincarnation subject. But there are those who are aware of what's referred to as the crystal cave, right? Which is a part of the planet not accessed by humans, right, in physical form, that actually contains in crystalline form something of all of our spiritual self, right, which carries along with it your past lifetimes, right, and akashically your future potentials, right, which I touched into another subject, which is the akashic, or the akash being not just of the record, which is the past, but also of the future potentials, right? Potential timelines, you might want to say. But getting way back to what I was referring to initially with the energy vampires, there is that deficiency, right? And that deficiency energetically is what causes and is the fuel behind the vampiric behavior, right? You know, take it to the famous lore that is in all the horror movies, right? What causes the vampires to behave in the way they do when we come to their savagery, right? Because in most cases, they're depicted in behaving rather quote unquote civilized, except for that thirst they just can't seem to shake, right? Which drives all of that pomp and fuss and quote unquote civilized behavior out of the window, and very animalistic behavior comes about. That is all about satisfying that thirst. So what is that? That is hunger, right? That animalistic behavior is hunger. It is the drive behind predatory nature. Hunger. Why is there hunger? You feel hunger because your body is sending a signal that you are lacking something. What are you lacking? You're lacking energy. And you need food to increase your energy. That is what hunger is, right? It's about a deficiency. And that is what these beings would fall into the category of, or entities, or individuals, whatever this manifests itself as in your life, right? Or in our world in a linear way. Yeah, all those things are the result of that deficiency. Now, let's start to take a peer into that sort of upper level of this. And I spoke about, or rather wrote about in my book, please check out, by the way, Peace, Love, Respect, This is the New Way is the title of my book, available now on Amazon, right? Or if you're in the greater Pittsburgh area, in a bookstore known as The Big Idea in the Bloomfield area. Thank you. But yeah, I wrote about in my book, we need to look at the system of rule implemented by the social economic elite on this planet and decipher exactly how it came to be and why we find ourselves under such suppression and oppression, right? Um, by such a small group over yielding their authority over a massively larger population, right? With strange efficiency, I'll say, until you look at it better. And the best way to do that, in my um, estimation, has always been pathological thinking, right? Getting to the root of the issue or the subject. And when I look at it pathologically, I talk about in the book how the organizations that put these systems into place, right? These organizations have implemented so over vast stretches of time, right? So it requires us to have an eye that is capable of doing the same thing, right? And when I say I mean perceptively how we take a look at what we deem or call history, right? Viewing into the past. So if we go into it with that kind of mindset, and I know I'm doing a lot to build up the mindset because I think that's important, right? When we look at something that has already been offered to us, right? We've already been told a version or several versions that sort of adhere to the same agenda of what history is, right? So having to now peer back and be open to the potential of there being an entirely, totally different version, right? I think requires a very prepared mind state, which I guess is why I'm harping on that. And when I say prepared, I mean prepared to be open and to not have anything sort of shackle your ability to proceed. So in the book, I talk about motivation, right? I mentioned societies, but to subject how they come in the organizational, right, world, um, and for how long history, right? That's been the um, and you when you do, the only one who's found this, and that secret societies go back for thousands on this planet. Um, the late great Credo Mutwa referred to most having their beginnings and their origins in ancient Africa, right? And holding or upholding ancient, very ancient wisdom, right? Or information. So, um, I realized that we had to go back with a willingness to peer back, maybe even before where most of us typically tend to settle in at when we think of ancient civilizations, which is Egypt, but that we'd have to likely peer beyond that, right? We go back into ancient Mesopotamia and start looking at what has been found and described in the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? And we have to take a look at what was happening and the structure behind what was happening in that entire region. I'm reluctant to name specific civilizations You know, I could start saying Babylonians, Assyrians, etc. But I just want to focus on specifically what that region, at least by archaeological finding, what that region is offering us, right, as a picture of what things look like. And you see something that is an underlying sort of theme to this day in association with a lot of these quote unquote secret societies, quote unquote. Um, and that is ritual sacrifice, right? And anybody keeping tabs on my channel will see that I've even put up reference to a video showing how, and I looked up on, checked up on it as well. Appears it's factual that John D. Rockefeller's house in Georgia is built on top of a sacrificial altar, a blood sacrificial altar where human beings, in fact, babies, it's, you know, difficult to even say, but babies were killed in these sacrificial offerings. And, you know, there were blood sacrifices. He chose to build his house directly on top of that. And the room in which this was done, this hasn't been verified, but there's a story that the room in which sits directly over top of the altar is where he and several other prominent early Americans, along with, I believe, some international influence as well, came up with the Federal Reserve System for the United States. So that's a rather interesting thing. But moving forward, what is, or rather, moving forward in the conversation, but backward in time, because we were looking for motivation. So the sacrifices themselves is not really the story. The motivation behind them is, right? Why does one perform these sacrificial offerings, right? Because you're attempting to appease someone or something, right? You're making an offering to someone or something, some entity that you're attempting to appease. All right, now we're getting somewhere because we're talking about what these individuals, right, viewed as their higher power, right? And with that, you're talking about, in most cases, in man's, as far as man goes, the most powerful motivation, right? That fear of the unknown, fear of your creator, fear of your God, fear of whatever you term your higher power to be. That is, throughout history, been, I would say, the most powerful motivation in terms of what things have happened on the planet as a result of or relative to that, right? So these individuals were attempting to appease, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls and the early Mesopotamian tablets, early tablets found in other archaeological findings found in that area. When decoded or translated, right, pretty much tell a story of interaction with otherworldly beings, right? Um, Commonly referred to as the Anunnaki. Now, I'm not going to get a lot into that. There are those who do an excellent job with that, like Billy Carson, for example, um, and others have historically. I'm not even going to start rattling off names, but you can certainly research that and easily find that stuff, right? But the motivation is what we're after, right? So what were they looking to do? If you look at what is written in terms of the communication between these beings and their human subjects, you very much see the hue or the nature of the relationship, right? It's essentially like, for lack of a perhaps adequate description, a tyrant being or group of beings, as it would be, that demands certain things of the human subjects or populace to appease their needs. Now, here's a very interesting part of it. Okay, to me, and I think to many, if you stop and think about it, think about the personality. Not only for those of you who are familiar with those translations, but also in most scriptures. Think about the personality that's being described, right? Between, I shouldn't say most, let's say, for example, right? For example, the Bible and the Quran. Okay. Think about the relationship that is being described, particularly in certain elements of the Bible, and I'm not trying to pick it out, but it's just very easy to see. Personality traits, right? You hear all the time, even in fact, about these personality traits: a jealous God, right? An angry God, a vengeful God. When in fact, if we study these character traits, these are immature traits, right? If we're talking about looking at it objectively in terms of spiritual maturity, these are in fact immature traits, which gives you a little bit of an understanding about who you're dealing with when you're talking about, though incredibly technologically advanced and perhaps, interdimensionally, multidimensionally, even spiritually advanced, were these individuals, but yet still their character traits showed huge signs of spiritual immaturity. Okay, so that's where what you have at sort of the pantheon, or the pinnacle of this pyramid of worship and of thought, right? So if they are worshiping, right, these individuals, and the people we're talking about who are worshiping these individuals actually created the social systems, which back then was all based off of priesthoods, right? They didn't have typical governmental structures, right? It was based rulership based off of the priesthoods. And hey y'all. And these individuals actually began the secret society systems that essentially remain intact today, right? That are more or less adhered to by the world's social economic elite. And if their overall motivation, because remember, I talked about this in previous description of the social economic elite, when we're not talking about millionaires, folks, right? Or even someone who happens to come up to $1 billion or $2. We're talking about multi-billionaires and even trillionaires, right? Some of the world's truly powerful. Some of these individuals and groups of individuals control and have amassed so much wealth, it's difficult to even put accurate calculation on. Okay, that's who we're talking about. And these individuals, their motivation is not money. You understand? These people are beyond the need for actual, what we would determine or call wealth. They're above that. So you have to ask yourself, what is their motivation? Okay, so now when you start to look at their behavior, it tells you what that is. And you see that they adhere to, with the pomp and fuss, with the masks they wear, many of their quote unquote social functions, right? You see the vestiges of the ceremonies upheld within these secret society circles, right? And it's really not even at this point that difficult to see or to get to that point. Okay, so now that we've established that, essentially, look at the connection, right? If the motivation was at that point to adhere, or not necessarily just to adhere to the rules of, but to actually appease these beings, these Anunnaki, right? And their character traits that played out on what that required, they were motivated to have these sacrifices. And fast forwarding, you see it goes right up to those socioeconomic elites when we start to refer to, again, what John D. Rockefeller's, the fact that his house was built on top of one of those sacrificial altars. Folks, the connections are there. They're just widespread and difficult to see at times, particularly if the time on your hand to do all research, what has been counted on by these elites for quite some time. That and the fact that, prior to the age, when we weren't in the information age, individuals didn't have the resources to just look up whatever information, resource, search whatever information they like in the palm of their hand. But it's one of the benefits of the information age, right? So we need to understand that motivation to get to how that thirst or hunger is correlated. Well, those character traits are the key pointers, right? They point to, in fact, those, they point to the fact that hunger is there, right? That lack of connection, which is most evident in those spiritually immature character traits that show you that being have to dominate, right? You dominate that in itself, hunger, right? You have need to feel the suffering of, particularly if you protect of, right, killing, and the blood, that is a huge marker and sign pointing to that hunger that I'm referring to, that all energy vampires have. And these individuals have them in the most severe symptom range, right? Many of you are familiar with the adrenochrome um, program, if you want to call it that. I think many of us will call it a very sick, sadistic addiction, and litany of crimes associated with it in order just to carry it off as some sort of underground industry offered to these economics participate in that, right? Um, this is huge. It's energy vampirism to like the highest degree, right? And is partaking of that? This social economic elite, folks. Those people you look at when you turn on your TV, right? The people who are in those boardrooms, the people who are making decisions in policy, right? The people in Washington. Unfortunately, folks, that's who we're talking about, right? In most instances. And not even getting into the international picture, right? We're talking about the people who are running the world, in fact, are serving a spiritual base that is in its most base nature the behavior of energy vampires. So essentially, you're talking about the world being ran by energy vampires, right? So, I think that is the understatement of all time to say there's a lot of work to be done. But it is also something that shouldn't be understated to say that this is a time of celebration to even have the opportunity to do this work, to change this planet finally. Remember, what have we talked about? These things have been going on throughout human history on this planet. And now we're the age, we're the people who are going to begin the change, right? We're the people who are living in the shift in paradigm where things work differently on the planet, where we speak up about what's been happening by those who are running the planet, why they do what they do, what their motivations are, and why it plays out in such sadistic, horrific, sick ways, not only in their personal practices that we've been talking about, and even ritualistic practices, but in the way that they run the world, right? Because that feeds, and this takes it to the apex of this on this planet, the apex of energy vampirism, that feeds an entire grid that they've had in place. And when I say they, I'm referring to those beings or entities that the early Sumerians were, according to their historically descriptive archaeological findings, according to that they were in contact with and interacted with and in some way served, right? And that didn't end with that civilization of humans, right? This interaction is something that archaeological findings all but verify has carried on and and continued throughout our history. Okay. So this is who is being appeased by all of this nefarious and dark behavior on the planet. It is those not who are necessarily the social economic elite, but those who they serve, those who they're looking to appease, those who, according to them, keep them in power, right? Because if you think about it, what do people say when, be grateful for your blessings, right? That's what the religions say. To them, them remaining in power with their families remaining in power in the world is like a, this is, they've convinced themselves that they're doing what's best on the planet. Certainly what's best for them. And they convince themselves that that's what's best for the planet, I guess. Or maybe they just don't care about what's best for the planet as long as it's what's best for themselves. But certainly they look to appease. And again, they show you this, they show the direct ties to the same ceremonial, ritualistic behavior that is depicted in those early Sumerians and other civilizations who carried on this ritualistic sacrificial behavior, right? Attempting to appease the very same entities that energies, beings, however you want to term it, that these individuals see as their higher power today, right? And really, folks, the research material is out there for each. You don't have to take my word on any of this. The material is out there. You can see the rituals that some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the world partake in and have done so for the longest, right? That's not something that I'm breaking the ice on. Look into that for yourself and ask yourself, why is there that correlation between their pomp and fuss, their ceremony, their rituals, and what was done thousands of years ago? Why do many of their parties emulate some of the darkest aspects of ancient Rome, right? With their quote unquote orgy environments that often led up to, or even sometimes included sacrifices, right? Why are these correlations there? And if you study it, you see that it all leads back to the systems of keeping the ancient knowledge, right? Secret, right? So that's why we call them secret societies. It's about controlling the flow of information, right? And that is what they have utilized as their main means, sort of staying in power and implementing their system of rule on the planet. Now you see drastic, as we have now entered into this phase where we have this opportunity to change all of that, right? And we do, right? As we have entered into that, you see them with them hitting the panic button. And that's why they have their foot on the gas on things like UN Agenda 21 and other aspects of their overall agenda that are being implemented around the world. That's why the big ramp up, because they're panicking. They know what's happening, right? They know, folks, and all of this is in correlation with an incredible area that we find ourselves in terms of our orbit of our solar system around the center of our galaxy. The area of the galaxy that we're in has made us, I don't want to use the term bombarded by, but very much open to energies that we've not experienced on this planet before, which is behind this age of awakening, right? Which is literally scientifically verified as incredibly interactive with the beings on this planet, particularly the mammals, and certainly those of the most intelligent mammals on the planet, which we like to consider ourselves, right? So all of this stuff, while broad-reaching, right? I told you part of the difficult part part of the difficulty in connecting the dots in all of this is that they spread the dots out so far, and you don't realize that you'll have to lean on disciplines and areas of study or science that may be vastly different, right? You won't realize that you might need to lean on psychology and like ufology at the same time, that you might have to lean on archaeology and physics at the same time, right? That you might have to lean on theology and you know, any other scientific discipline that we want to name that comes into play with this. The dots can be very far spread, and that makes it difficult to see what's going on. But again, that's the idea of it, right? That's why this knowledge is, and you know, of course, I'm only covering certain aspects of it, but this knowledge is compiled and given out, right, or disseminated in secrecy, and has been that way for quite some time, right? Again, these secret societies have existed for thousands of years. You know, think about the fact that so much of the world's truly important artifacts, right, both artistically and historically, archaeological findings, are kept in the Vatican, right? Much of which completely secret from the rest of the world, and no one says anything. No one's challenged that to change that as part of the old paradigm yet. I think that that's a big part of where we need to be headed with all this. We need to continue to uncover these secrets, and there are certainly a bevy of them there, just in what is kept from public view, right? Also, similar things are done here in this side of the world with archaeological findings, in my opinion, with the Smithsonian Institute, right? And they're often recorded lack of forthcomingness or even reluctancy to have transparency about many of their findings, right? And even the question of some things being lost or hidden that certainly shouldn't be. Man, all these things we have an opportunity to change now as we're changing this paradigm, right? It's up to us to be sovereign enough to demand these things, because they are for all of us to move forward, right? On this planet, we need to have that kind of transparency and let that knowledge aid us in our collective spiritual maturity. All right, so that we're not all energy vampires, and continuing to have systems that feed an actual grid energetically that those energy vampires would feed off of. Let's have a completely different paradigm. It's time for it, right? It's time to continue to do what? Build the worldwide movement. Peace, love, respect. Please remember, like, share, subscribe. Click the notification button. Tell everybody you know. Tell some folks you don't know. I love you all. Thank you. Worldwide movement. Peace, love, respect. Big King Sadiq. I'm out.